the dirtiest race in history, the 30th anniversary. It was without doubt the most controversial moment in Olympic track history. 30 years have gone by, but those images still remain. Many felt Ben Johnson was a victim and that he was made an example of. In Richard Moore's The Dirtiest Race in History, every moment that led up to the 1988 100-meter race finish in Seoul is brought alive through words. Will anybody ever know the truth? Was Johnson's drink spiked? Or like so many after him, was it just the pressure of winning that got to him? This is the moment that we all have been waiting for, the session that uncovers it all. It is a huge honor and privilege for this festival to bring together the legendary Ben Johnson and the world-renowned author of several books on sport, Richard Moore. Speaking to them is media entrepreneur, co-promoter of NNIS and emerging sports, Shireen. Let's welcome them with a huge round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's really an honor to welcome Ben Johnson to Bhubaneswar. Ben, thank you so much for being here. And Richard Moore, he's a fabulous author, has written an amazing array of books. We'll get to that. First and foremost, Ben, when you see this race, it's been 30 years. How often do you replay 1988?
It seems like yesterday, but you know, it's been 3 decades. So every time it's been played or I've been to different function and it's sort of race, I still get goosebumps.
When you're in your day, like you said, it's been 3 decades. It's been a long, long time. What are the reminders that set it off for you?
Well, it's always in the media for the last 30 years, so it seemed like it was yesterday. But it's quite thrilling to see as a young boy who grew up in Jamaica and be the top of the world, what I need to accomplish as a young kid in my life. So it was quite thrilled.
And as I can see from the audience, the moment they see the race, everybody gets goosebumps. That moment, when you relive it, what do you think the most?
Well, I just say that as a young boy, you know, spending almost half my life doing the thing I love is to run and become the best sprinter in the world at that moment is a very thrilling excitement.
Richard, when you started to write on this entire controversy, the dirtiest race in history, as I understand, it was all about the controversy. But somewhere along the way, that changed, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was quite young when the race was on. I was 15, I think, when the race was run. And at that age, you really absorb these, you know, great sporting moments. And this, for me, was one of the outstanding sporting moments that I could remember, really defining moment. But what I remembered it for mainly was the positive drugs test that followed after the race. That's what everybody knows about this race. And I think the reaction here to watching the replay there is interesting because when people watch the race again, you do get that thrill from watching it. And, you know, in going back and writing this book, I watched it many, many, many times, and still, every time I watch it, I feel that same thrill. So there are kind of two things. There's the race itself, and there's the positive test that followed. And I don't think the positive test completely, well, it doesn't destroy the reaction that people have, even with the knowledge they have to the race. It still inspires a certain reaction in people, even now.
Right. Ben, 1997 Rome, you were the superstar. You were on top of the game. You were on top of the world. At that point, Seoul was upcoming. Did it, at that point, seem to you that maybe you were on a winning streak and you should leave it there, or it was just all a preparation in your mind for Seoul?
Well, when I was growing up in Jamaica and I came to Canada, as a young boy, you know, I always wanted to be at the Olympic Games, and not only by winning gold medal, but just to be a part of the games and meeting wonderful people and travel over the world and so forth. So that's what I was intention of doing. But when I win the gold medal in Rome, my dream hasn't finished yet. My destiny is to win the gold medal in Seoul. That was my destiny and that was my dream, and I was going for the gold no matter what.
You've spoken sometimes about the fact that Canada, your country, did not support you as much as you had hoped they would. Why do you feel that way?
It's a lot of politics that plays in this area, and most of my people in the government in Canada, such as the Federation, I should say, my coach Charlie Francis and them have a bad blood for many, many years. And Charlie developed his athletes to the greatest potential that he can be, and then they were trying to get in touch with us as a young boy, but they didn't support us as an athlete. And then when we started making it and started doing very, very well, then the Federation started coming up and say, who are these kids, you know, where they came from. We didn't want their phone numbers and names so we can contact these pros. Then Charlie was the one who guided us and bring us forward. And Charlie said, if you guys want my athletes, you have to come to me. And from there on, I was a part of that bad blood that's been triggered on for the last 46 years of since I met Charlie until now. So, so the Federation didn't like us, but we honored Charlie's guidance at the time.
Right. Which brings me to another point which I want to ask both of you. This, you know, doping is not just black or white. There are lots of things that go with it. There is also an entire infrastructure. There are the coaches, there are the other team members, there's the federation, there are the officials. When you were doing the investigation for this book, what kind of role was the support staff playing? And I'd like to ask Ben that as well.
Well, absolutely. I mean, Ben mentions Charlie. Charlie Francis was his coach, and he had his own history as a sprinter in the 70s where, you know, there was a certain point in his career where he realized that he was up against East Germans, Soviet sprinters who were doping and part of an organized system, and that he had a choice either to join in with that, to dope, or to give up on his athletic career. He chose to dope, and then when he set up, became a coach and set up a sprinters group in Toronto, of which Ben was part, he sort of told his athletes the same thing. I think they really had no choice other than to dope, being part of that group. And, you know, Ben, you mentioned, you know, in the introduction that you know, Ben it was such a high-profile case, his positive test in Seoul. But the problem was really quite endemic in the sport, and he certainly wasn't the only one cheating. I mean, we know now that the book is called The Dirtiest Race in History. 6 of the 8 athletes at some point or other were involved in doping cases. Not all of them were punished. But the problem was there was no. It's easy to forget now that back then anti-doping barely existed. There were positive tests; they were covered up. We know now that Carl Lewis tested positive on the eve of the Olympic Games, but wasn't punished. It took another decade until we had the World Anti-Doping Agency established, and things have improved since then. But back then, in the 80s, I think with the Eastern Bloc on one side and the US on the other, doping was very prevalent.
Ben, taking from the point that Richard made, Carl Lewis, they say, got a lot of support from the US government, even though there were a lot of speculation, there were a lot of rumors. And the other thing which Richard spoke about was this unspoken or maybe spoken rivalry between you and Carl. Would you talk about that to us?
Well, just about 6 weeks, 8 weeks before the Olympic Games in Seoul, I was in Zurich with my coach, Charlie, and I didn't feel that I'm going to win a race, but I decided to, you know, want to see where I'm at, you know. And we all lined up in the blocks, and then the gun went off, and then I reacted, and I ran down the track about 6 to 7 meters as I just went on the gas, and then Carl Lewis came up and beat me. I didn't know that just before then he tested positive for some type of bad substance, and he said to his interviews after the race that Ben Johnson would never beat me again. And in Zurich, that was only one good race I have all year round. So, and then just before that, you know, I was 20 pounds overweight because I went down to St. Kitts just to have a good time because of my injury. I was drinking a lot of beer and, you know, having fun on the beach for 12 years of my life. I didn't have that kind of lifestyle because I left from high school and went into track right away. So I didn't have a lot of fun like a lot of kids has to go in the park and play with their friends. And my regiment was just train like a horse for 12 years. And I said to my mom, I'm very tired and I want to take a rest. And a lot of people saying that, well, you know, the Olympic Games is only 8-9 weeks away. And I said, I don't care. I just want to enjoy myself for the first time in my life. So Charlie and I didn't speak for many months. And then people were trying to get me apart, away from him, saying that you see that he doesn't care about you. He didn't call to see how you were doing or your injury was coming along. And then the people who was around me were trying to manipulate me, so to speak, to get me away from Charlie because they see making a lot of money. You know, so I didn't see that. I just see that just having fun with my friends I met on the beach, you know, roast fish and playing dominoes and having fun and so forth. So that's what I grew up to do, and that's what I like. So after that, I went back to Toronto, and Charlie still didn't talk to me. And I sit down in my house, and I say, you know what, I better go to the track tomorrow because time is running out. And I say, Charlie, let's go to work. We came this far, so let's start the ball rolling. And we started to do some training, and my time was improving, and I was ready for Seoul.
Richard spoke about the fact that there was very little awareness at that point about performance-enhancing drugs. There was very little awareness with the athletes themselves about what was happening to their body. Would you say the same thing for yourself?
Well, there is some athletes in that race was using performance-enhancing drugs, but their profile never changed. It still remained the same, but you can tell by the body structures and the muscles and the tissues doesn't have much water around the muscles and tissues and so forth. So you can tell that there was on something. Not only that, when I got hurt in 1988 and I was not in good shape, so the 100 meter was up for grab. You know, everybody's trying to come out to win a gold medal. So everybody was trying to do their own stuff, what they were doing, but I was calm and collected because I know that I'm going to come back and win a gold medal.
And what gave you that confidence?
My faith, my religion, and my hard training for so many years. I've been doing the same training for almost 20 years to perfect it. One thing is to get to the blocks and just run fast.
Ben, you've spoken a lot about Charlie in the last 10 minutes. There's a very close and beautiful relationship there, isn't there?
Yeah, we have a very close relationship. For coaches and athletes who are here, you know, sprinters on my caliber who have 5 wide, fast twitch muscles, we can explode very easily if we doesn't get what we wanted by the coaches up to understand the athletes, because he can say something that I don't like and I just explode. And for the coaches, for athletes, you have to know when to talk to your athletes, because if you say something that not so, then that athletes can perform better, can train better, can focus, and so it's very important. So Charlie and I have a really good understanding of each other. We never get into any arguments. I do as I told. I don't ask him why I'm doing this. I just do it because he's the guy who knows the training and the techniques and the recovery and everything.
Richard, can you tell us a little bit, when you were investigating for the book, who was, or number of people who were very important to the material that you got?
Well, when I started out, obviously Ben and Carl Lewis were the two most important people, because what I quickly realized, you know, revisiting the race and the story and the context and, you know, the story from the Los Angeles Olympics in 1984 up to Seoul, was the key thing here. It was a rivalry. And for me, some of the greatest sporting stories are about rivalries. And what was wonderful about this rivalry was just how different Carl Lewis and Ben Johnson were. I asked Ben when I met him in Toronto whether he'd ever actually had a conversation with Carl Lewis, and he said only once, when he tried to drive a Porsche car that Carl Lewis had been driving, and he tried to have a go in the car after him, and he basically refused to give you the keys. So there was only this one conversation they'd ever had with each other. And they were complete opposites on the track. You know, Ben was very muscular. He was like a boxer. Carl Lewis was very graceful, you know, taller, very elegant. So he was like a butterfly. You know, they were just complete opposites. And the more one was like the other, the more the other one went the other way. And what fascinated me was just, you know, Carl Lewis in '84 was unbeatable. I describe him as the Michael Jackson of athletics. He had that kind of aura about him. And Ben, over the next few years, really got into his head. And you could see in Seoul, Carl Lewis is obsessed with Ben Johnson. He keeps looking at him before the race, during the race. He drifts over towards him in his lane. So the rivalry really fascinated me. So Carl Lewis and Ben Johnson were obviously the key people I wanted to speak to. But when I set out, I had no idea if they would speak to me. And as I read more about it, I realized there were all this incredible cast of characters around them as well. I mean, Charlie Francis unfortunately died just before I started work on this. He'd written an amazing book called Speed Trap, which is extraordinary, and I spoke to a lot of people who knew him very well and really brought him back to life for me. Joe Douglas, who was Carl Lewis's coach, a fascinating figure. I mean, he had a guru, Sri Chinmoy, who might be well known around here. Carl Lewis was very close to him. And there were all kinds of strange people involved. There was a guy called Jack Scott, who seemed to be a good friend of Carl Lewis's, who ended up working with Ben just before Seoul. So there was all this intrigue. And then, most intriguingly, there was a guy called Andre Jackson, who ended up in the doping control room with Ben in Seoul, as Ben waited to give his urine sample, drank eight cans of beer, Ben said, in trying to produce a urine sample. And many of those cans were handed to him, apparently, by this guy, Andre Jackson. And it turned out later that Andre Jackson was a good friend of Carl Lewis. So, you know, Ben remains convinced to this day that Andre Jackson spiked his drink in that room. We don't know whether that's true or not. But there was all this intrigue around it and really fascinating characters.
Ben, Richard has very interestingly said that you and Carl were completely different on and off the track, and that Carl was obsessed with you. Do you agree?
We don't like each other. You know, we are both athletes trying to be the best that we can be. And Carl Lewis had his day in '84 Olympic Games, and my time was 4 years later. So I really applaud him that what he did winning 4 gold medal, and didn't have any negative towards him, no animosity. I was one of the guys who went up and shake his hand and say congratulations of equal Jesse Owens 4 gold medal, and I just say, you know what, my day will come. And I went home to my house in Toronto, and I sit down for about 5, 6, 8 hours watching the Olympic final in Los Angeles, how I can improve my performance. And from what I understand, the last 5, 6 hours is my 0 to 80 meters was okay. It's just the last 40 meters that was lack of strength and power. And I only takes off 1 week, and I went back into training. So my secret was not to play any catch up. Always be ahead of my components, keep ahead, and keep improving. And that was my success over the years. I never was out of shape. Even off seasons, like September, October, November, I can still set the world record at off season. So I was never in shape, and that was my secret of success every year. Just keep getting better and better.
I think there's something I'd like to share with the audience. When Ben came here and he was told that he has a security officer, he asked him whether he could run or not. And Ben, today, how fast can you run 100 meters?
Well, at this moment, I don't know, but if I train good for about maybe 6 to 8 months, I could still run a 10.7, 10.8 at my age, which is pretty fast.
So even today, he can give anyone a run for their money. Ben, when we talked about, Richard spoke about the fact that there were various people around you when the entire testing was happening, and you still maintained that you were unaware of what was happening, that your drinks were spiked. You you feel that that's what happened?
Well, 30 years later, and 30 years later again, if I'm still alive, but I can say to the world that when I get into Seoul, I was clean, and when I left there, I was dirty. So I know that for a fact that the Americans really want the gold medal, and one of my problems also too is I was with Adidas, and I switched over to Diadora because the Italians also have a great love for Ben Johnson. So, and the Italians doesn't like Carl Lewis very much. So I have a good shoes contract with Diadora, and most of the shoes company didn't like that. So they was upset. So that's the truth.
Richard, when you start writing on a topic which is being covered, which is on television, which has it's a very divisive issue. What is it that you kept in mind when you were writing the book? Because it went on to become such a huge bestseller.
I think that it's, I'm as interested in almost explaining the process. I look on it as a bit of a detective story. And, you know, even now, if I was to rewrite the book now, there's new information come to light just in the last few weeks about what happened in Seoul in 1988. So new things emerge all the time. And there was, it was a fear, a slight worry with this book that the story had been well covered, well documented. There was a guy, Dan Gordon, making a film about it at the same time as well. But I was confident that there was still other stuff to find out. And that could have, you know, Ben mentions the shoe companies, there's the presence of Andre Jackson. You know, there's still a lot of mystery and a lot of intrigue about this. But I was also really interested to just revisit these athletes 25 years on, as it was at the time, to see, you know, what the legacy of the race was for Ben and for Carl Lewis. And, you know, before I wrote the proposal for the book, I was just looking around the internet for bits of information about what Ben was up to today. And there were various rumors about where he hung out in Toronto, that he was coaching. And I was just fascinated to go, for a lot of people, their last memory of Ben Johnson, probably him being smuggled out of Seoul after the 100 meters. He did come back a few years later, but you know, there was the race itself, and then a few days later, he was smuggled out of Seoul through the airport as if he was a murderer or something. And I think a lot of people saw that, and while they condemned the doping, they had some sympathy for somebody in that position. And so there was all this that I was interested in, and really in finding out what the effect of that race had been on these athletes and also on the other 6 athletes in the race.
Ben, you know, we all benefit from hindsight. We all benefit from saying, oh, I wish this had happened and that had happened. 30 years down the line, is there anything about that year, that month, those days that you would have done differently?
I couldn't have done anything differently because that was my true destiny. Whatever is supposed to happen in my life 30 years ago, that's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way God planned it. He's trying to test my strength and my courage to go through this thing and come out back of the hand. But like what Richard Moore said a minute ago, is when I test positive in Seoul, I rushed out of the village, not in the village, at my hotel, and get a flight from Seoul to New York. When I get to New York, there was about at least 600 media was outside. And from New York to Toronto, the flight was full. And I want to make sure that my mother and my sister was protected as much as I can. And the FBI and the police was there, and they said that, well, you know, the flight is full, we got no more seats for Ben. I said, I don't care, unless my mother and my sisters is fine, I don't worry about myself. I said to the FBI that I could stay behind. I said, no, these media here will chew you up. And I said, I don't care. And so they make a phone call, and it was okay. This is the first time it ever happened, I believe. I fly into the cockpit. That was the only seat left on the plane. And, you know, what we know that over the years, what's going on with terrorists and everything like that, today will never happen. But those are some of my stories I talk to people about.
What was your family's reaction and support at that time? How did they talk to you?
My mother was my great supporter through this ordeal. And just about in Seoul, after the incident, the Lord had spoken to her and given her a vision and say that everything's going to be okay. And I was in part of that dream. And there was a couple of swords were sticking me from all different angles. This is true. This is very spiritual. And everything was joking me from all angles. And a sword came from heaven down with a light, and all the swords move away. And my mom said to me that whatever they took from you, you're going to get it back. And I won't be alive to see this moment. And I said to her, what do you mean by that? You won't be around. And I said, son, I won't be around, but when the time comes, you will know that I tell you so. And now, over the last week or so, there are new evidence that my drug test papers was flawed, and it was a lot of wrongdoing, a lot of mistakes. So, and there's more things that are coming out that I really can't speak too much at this moment.
So what she said might actually turn out to be true.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Richard, when I'd like to, because a lot of questions are going to come from the audience. Before I do that, I want to talk to you a little bit about the fact that Richard has written a lot of books. He has a cycling podcast. He's written on cycling and the controversies there. You've also written on Bolt. The entire process of writing on such, acclaimed stars, legendary stars, and their whole personalities, what is it that you keep in mind? Tell us a bit about the process.
I think with any book that I've written, I've started out without knowing whether the subject would even speak to me. And that really, the first book I ever wrote was about somebody who disappeared, a cyclist who had vanished. And I was very keen to write a biography of this cyclist, but that seemed to be an insurmountable obstacle, the fact that he'd vanished. And it was a friend in the pub to me, in the pub one night, said, well, you just go in search of then, and the story then becomes the search for the subject rather than, so that process of writing, of researching, of trying to discover things, it's very much, that is the book.
But for the dirtiest race in history, Carl Lewis didn't really speak to you, did he?
Carl Lewis wouldn't speak to me. He demands a lot of money for interviews. So the film that was being made at the same time, they paid him, I believe, $30,000 for an interview and didn't really get an awful lot out of him. Ben's a bit cheaper, but I did actually manage to ambush Carl Lewis. So I did manage to get an interview with him. He was one day in London. I was working in a library and working on this book in a library, and a friend of mine called me and said, did you not say you were writing a book about Carl Lewis at the moment? I said, I am. He said, he's standing in front of me. I'm in the Nike store on Oxford Circus. And I said, well, give me 5 minutes. I sprinted there, not quite at 10.7 pace, but I sprinted there as quickly as I could and managed to get into this closed event, flashing my press card. And there was a bunch of school children and a couple of reporters, and there was Carl Lewis, and he spoke for a while, and there were some other sports stars there, but I managed to get Lewis on his own a bit later on, well, me and another journalist, and managed to speak to him for 40 minutes without having to pay him, which was nice. I'm Scottish, so I don't like to pay money when I don't have to, but so I got this encounter with him, and really that's all I needed, because it's as much about impressions, I think, and about, you can learn a lot about somebody from speaking to the people around him as well.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take some questions from the audience, please. All right, lots of hands up. Can we pass the mic on, please? Yeah, we'll take the school student first, please.
Good morning, sir. I'm Anshuman from Sai International School. My question is to Ben Johnson, sir. Apart from athletics and sprinting, what is the other sport you played when you were training for?
I used to play a lot of soccer when I was a young kid. I was a very good soccer player then I was running. But I always have a lot of problems, breaking my feet or spraining my ankles and come to practice, and my coach always asked me, you know, are you going to train today? And I said, no, I can't train today. I don't feel good. But I couldn't say to him that I was playing soccer because he hated me playing soccer because I was getting injuries. But soccer was my first love because that was the national sports in Jamaica. But I give it up, and then about maybe 3 months, 4 months later, we have the World Junior Championship in Sudbury, Canada, and that's where I met Carl Lewis for the first time, 1980. He won the gold medal there. Yeah, I think he won 10:21, 10:26. I finished second to last because I couldn't train for almost 2.5 months leading up to the games. So from that day, I don't play no more soccer.
Did soccer help you in any way in sprinting?
Sprinting too, yeah, but soccer was my first love. Yeah.
Ben, his question is, does soccer help you in sprinting?
Well, no, soccer is not the master of all sports. Track and field is the master of all sports because whatever you do in developing your skills or your potential in track and field, you can play any sport you want. So track and field will allow you to do a lot of things, endurance, strength, power, flexibility, plyometrics, all that stuff. So once you do those elements of training, you can do any sports.
Thank you, sir.
Next question, please. Yes. Can we-
Good morning, sir. Sir, my question is to Ben Johnson. Sir, what are your views on Usain Bolt's retirement?
So Usain Bolt?
Usain Bolt's retirement, he's asking.
I heard that Usain Bolt retired. Now he's playing soccer in Australia, so we never met. We don't know each other very well, so that's where I leave it.
Thank you, sir.
You've never met him.
I never met him, no. It's, when I was running in Seoul, he was only 2 years old. So,
Well, can I just say something
Yes,
there?
please.
Because I went on and did a book about Usain Bolt after the Dirtiest race in history, and you know, Ben is from a place called Falmouth originally in Jamaica, and Usain Bolt went to school there, and it's just incredible when you go to Jamaica and go to this corner of the island and realize how many world-class sprinters have come from this the Trelawney district. It's quite extraordinary.
it's amazing, yeah.
Well, maybe at a Kamru festival next year, we'll have Ben and Usain Bolt together. Then you can meet him. Can we take the next question, please?
Sir, my question to you is, what was your mindset after all the controversy of the Seoul Olympics? What make you to what make you to think to come back in your life, sir?
What made you bounce back in life is his question after Seoul.
Well, my greatest thing in life is to live. That is more important. Once you live, you can do anything. Everything is possible. So,
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Ben. I am Aumya Chand from Dhenkanal, Orissa, as well, India, international sports announcer. I'm former junior sprinter in national level in my young days. Ben, I have seen some of slides before this questionnaire session started that you are very, very sincere in taking the starts, getting out of the block with fire. So after reaching the final of, as you are the fastest man on the world as well as the earth, I am very excited to have a live talk with you and questioning. It's a great pleasure for me and to put some knowledge in my mind to speak further in international competitions. Ben, after reaching the 100-meter final in the Olympic, what is your intention to take the start, good start, and lead from the front till the finish? Or if you fail to take good start, how to complete and goes for the gold? What are the two factors in your mind? If you recollect, kindly answer me.
when I was growing up, in Toronto, and I was doing my starts as a young child, I was 14, 15 years old, and I have two types of starts. I have one start where I come out with, and the body will drive out face for about 20, 30 meters and come up. Then my other start was just to jump out of the blocks. And I said to myself, I like this one better. So I stick with that start, and as I get stronger and faster and more confident in myself, I get better. But all the power that that I have came from my back muscles, was very big. It was like my forearm. My glutes and my hip flexors was very strong. It was like a tree trunk. You can tell by mostly great soccer players of this type of a structure like Maradona. So that was my secret. And because I have fast twitch wide 5 muscles that I can react faster than a gun, that would give me the advantage to get the blocks as fast as I can. I was the only sprinters in the world who can just react and just keep on running down the track. So that was my secret.
Next question,
Ben?
please.
That's it.
Hi Ben, this is Devashish. Good morning. What I wanted to ask you was when you are actually having a tough time in terms of running and people not recognizing you for running, which other sport gave you the comfort, gave you that stress relief, gave you that space to be cope up and come back? Did you go into any other sport at that point in time to give you comfort, or how did you actually cope during that situation?
Well, I didn't go to any other sports because track and field was my first love from since I was a young child. That was the gift the Lord gave me, and I just use it the best way I can. I have a great coach, Charlie Francis, who are very knowledgeable, very brilliant in this area, and we understand each other program. I remember when I was first coaching with, training with my brother and older athletes, I was one of the youngest one in the group, and I couldn't keep up with those guys, and I quit for about maybe 6 to 7 weeks because I couldn't do the training. And Charlie got to me, once you come back and maybe we can do something for you. And I said, okay, and I told my brother that to tell Charlie that I'm going to be coming back to the training. And then we sit down in the stands for about half an hour. And then he took a pen and paper and write down my program down. And always the guys then was doing like 600 meters, 500 meters, because I only weighed 98 pounds then, and I couldn't do the workout because I was so small. And he gave me the workout, and I did it, and I came back, and he said, how do you like it? And I said, I like this type of workout. So that training that he gave me and understand my muscles and my body and my mind this training program was tailor-made for Ben Johnson only. And over the years, my coach, Charlie Francis, talked to a lot of East German coaches and a lot of coaches over Europe, and he put all his knowledge together and become one of the brilliant coaches in this era. And now, at the Dublin Quarry, when he started to point out my regiment training, and the whole world started to understanding how I'm capable of running that fast and the training that I was doing, it was magnificent because when I do train, I train at maximum. And a lot of people can't do that because it's impossible to train at maximum at all times, because when you do that, then you shock your central nervous system, which is your heart, your lungs, your kidney, your liver, need to be rehabilitation. So it was very hard for me to do, but I make it look easy because I love the sports and I love track and field and I love to run fast. And all my fans around the world, they always want to see me run because they're going to get a really good excitement, a good thrill of a lifetime.
In fact, Richard's book starts with his start and the look in his eyes. Can you describe that to us?
Yeah, I mean, everybody who watched that race will remember Ben. The whole bill, the thing about 100 meters is writing a 300-page book about a race that lasts 9.79 seconds is on the one hand a challenge, but all the action really happens in the build-up to the race. And I heard about what went on on the warm-up track beforehand, the mind games that are going on between the athletes, and just before Seoul, if you watch the footage, you can see Carl Lewis walking along the line, shaking everybody's hand. He catches Ben eventually. Ben reluctantly shakes his hand, but Ben's last to settle in the blocks, which is, I think, important psychologically to be the last one down. And yeah, that he was very low as well on the track, whereas Lewis was quite high. And Ben, when that start, you'd had a false start already in the semi-final. You were given a false start, weren't you? I mean, again, I just reread the book on my way here to remind myself, but...
I didn't false start. I was too fast for the gun.
Yeah, you were too fast for the gun, yeah. But when you read it again, you realize in the quarterfinals, you qualified as fastest loser. You were third in the quarterfinal because you eased up too soon, and so you had to wait. I think you were 10.17, so you went through as fastest loser, and then in the semi-final, they incorrectly called a false start. They did it on site rather than with the technology that was available at the time. So he was quite lucky to make the final in a way. But when the final got underway, you know, the second it started, there was no doubt. I mean, Ben's start was extraordinary. Yeah, by 10 meters, he had a clear lead.
Okay.
Ben, hi.
Hello.
Ben, I have a two-part question here. One is, before the Seoul Olympics, Canada regarded you as a hero, but after it, you were considered a Jamaican immigrant. Does that still hurt you from Canadian hero to Jamaican immigrant? And remembering your rivalry with Carl Lewis, what's the one thing, best or whatever you want, that comes to your mind first, remembering your rivalry with Carl Lewis? So 2 questions.
When I have my problem in Seoul, and the Kenyan government was so, well, I would say they're embarrassed, so to speak, but he came out and said that I should go back to Jamaica. So that was the saddest things I ever heard in my life, and very painful, because I sweat my blood and for my whole life to perfect it one thing and run the country that I love, that I live in, give my best, and that's the way I was treated. So I was kind of really disappointed that those things happened, but I just didn't care, because deep down in my heart, in my mind, I know what happened in Seoul, and I got great support from all the people and support around the world and my parents. So after Seoul, I came back and started to run again and everything. I forgot
His
the other
second question was about what is the most important thing from your rivalry with Carl Lewis. Is that your question? Yeah.
Well, what comes to mind
What
when you
comes to
think
mind?
of Carl Lewis now?
When I think about Carl Lewis in Seoul, he's going around shaking hands. I don't want to shake nobody's hands. I come here to win the gold medal, you know, so. So he tried to play a psychology game on me, and I'm not going to play that kind of game. So I keep my calm and keep focused on my path, and then everybody say, on your marks, and then I walk up very slowly behind everybody, and by then, I'm already dictating the race. So I'm frozen the muscles and the mental mind, and my muscles still firing because I'm still walking into the blocks. Because I'm already meditate a few days before my race, how I'm gonna run this race, and what distance and what meters I'm gonna be accelerating and changing gear as I go along. So I also do a mental preparation in my head, and there's something also, a gift that I get, do mental preparation from
All right,
muscle.
we'll take just one last question,
Yeah.
please. So
Sir?
after him. Yeah.
Sir, presently Christian Coleman is the fastest runner of this world. But I think so, he has been tested 3 times, doping test, but no action has been taken against him. But I think in your case, it has been taken action speedily. So my question to you, sir, is there any politics in sports? Is there any politics in international federations? Please tell us. What?
That's a very vast question. Basically, Ben, he wants to know that the politics that we in India, in a lot of federations, there's a lot of politicking that happens. Is it the same in other federations as well, abroad? Politicking, and I think maybe Richard, you can take that question.
It's your view, sir. It's, madam,
Yes, they will both answer the question, please.
Yeah.
I mean, this sort of links to the doping question, I suppose, and it's a question about corruption in sport as well. And you tend to get the full picture much later on. So, you know, when I went to research this and realized just how bad things were back in the 80s, I was pretty shocked, but we don't know what's really going on now. It does seem that, and there's lots of questions at the moment about the World Anti-Doping Agency and the leadership of the World Anti-Doping Agency, and I think one thing that's really missing in a lot of sports bodies is proper athlete representation, and there are a number of current athletes who are trying really hard at the moment to have their voice heard and to be represented properly, because they don't feel, with decisions such as Russia being readmitted into world sport, that they are being properly represented and that they have a voice.
Understood properly, the problems are being understood.
Well, I think that the clue is in the word politics. You know, the people who are running sport are also conscious of a wider political picture, which with sport, you know, Russia's one of the countries that these days has the money to host major international events. And so the IOC and the other sports federations are very reluctant to cast Russia out into the cold. And unfortunately, we're getting to a situation where it seems that the countries that are prepared to pay the money to host major international events are countries that are perhaps not the best examples of democracies.
Democracy, right. Okay, firstly, I'd request the audience to please pipe down a little bit. Let's keep the volume down. There's one last question, sir. Please ask.
It's for Ben. I'm an old-timer. New rules have come in terms of starting. What's your take on that?
New rules on starting a race. New rules, he says, have come in on starting a race. What do you think about them?
For disqualification?
The new rules starting the game?
Yes. Of starting, yes, 100 meters.
I do believe that with the new rules now, it's about sponsorship and commercial. So if she or he running the 100 meters or 200 meters or any sprint events and they fall started, then they're disqualified. In my time, we allowed 2 false starts. But now everything's have changed. To the other gentleman who answer say that if the federation, such as the IWF or the IOC, to ban all these Russian athletes, because next year we have the World Championship and a year later we have the Olympic Games. So the Russian athletes have about at least 700 members on the roster. And if they are after being banned, there's no Olympic Games. There's nobody to run against. So we know that the government of Russia is spending over $400 or $500 billion to the IOC. So money talks.
Right. We've got to end the session, but before we do, I'm sorry, the session's over. Ben, there are lots of athletes who would like you to just give them one parting lesson. What is that motto or mantra that budding athletes in India should live by, since you're a coach yourself?
Well, number one, get a lot of sleep. Eat very well, good nutrition, good coaching, believe in your coach, believe in yourself, train hard, build your power, your speed, your endurance, regeneration, plyometrics, and on those things have to implement it at the right time, because you can overtrain and you can undertrain. So this is very important.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Ben Johnson and Richard Moore.